The heart of every family restaurant is its kitchen, and the soul is in its recipes. That's what my father always said, and he would know. The Golden Dragon had been in our family for 3 generations. What he never told me was how quickly family could turn against family when there was money to be made. I'm Lucy Chen, 28 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. I was the daughter of Michael Chen, the proud owner of San Francisco's most beloved Chinese restaurant, and the granddaughter of Wei Chen, who'd started it all with nothing but a dream and my grandmother's recipes. Growing up, the Golden Dragon was my second home. While other kids played with toys, I played with flour and spices. My father taught me everything: how to fold the perfect dumpling, how to tell when the soup base had reached the right consistency, how to make our famous secret sauce that customers would beg to buy by the bottle. A recipe is more than ingredients, he'd say, watching me carefully measure spices. It's history, it's family, it's love. Never forget that, Lucy. I never did. Even when I went away to culinary school, even when I trained in top restaurants across the country, I always knew I'd come back to the Golden Dragon. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was my heritage, my future. My Uncle Peter, Dad's younger brother, worked there too. He managed the business side of things while Dad ran the kitchen. It seemed like the perfect partnership. Uncle Peter had an MBA and years of corporate experience, while Dad was a culinary genius who could turn the simplest ingredients into magic. "Your father's lucky to have me," Uncle Peter would say, showing me the books. He'd be lost in all this paperwork without his little brother looking after things. I didn't think much of those comments at the time. Uncle Peter had always been a bit arrogant, but he was family. Besides, the restaurant was thriving. We had lines out the door every weekend, rave reviews in local papers, and even a feature in a national food magazine. Then came the diagnosis. Dad had been feeling tired for months, but we all assumed it was just the long hours at the restaurant. When he finally went to the doctor, the cancer was already in stage 4. Terminal. 6 months, the doctor said gently. Maybe less. I wanted to quit my job at a prestigious restaurant in New York, come home immediately to help, but Dad insisted I stay. "Finish your training," he said during our nightly phone calls. "Learn everything you can. The Golden Dragon will be here when you're ready." What I didn't know then was that Uncle Peter had been whispering in Dad's ear during those final months, suggesting that maybe I wasn't ready for the responsibility of running a restaurant, that maybe Dad should consider other options for the Golden Dragon's future. I came home 3 months before Dad passed away. He was already so weak, spending more time in the hospital than at home. But his mind was sharp as ever, especially when it came to the restaurant. One night, when the nurses had left and we were alone, he called me closer to his hospital bed. "Lucy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to give you." From under his pillow, he pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook. I recognized it immediately. Grandma's cookbook, the one that contained all our family's secret recipes. "But Dad," I protested, "you always keep this in the restaurant safe." He smiled weakly. "Not anymore. It belongs to you now. Everything does." His hand trembled as he held out the book. "Peter, your uncle. He's been asking about the recipes, especially the sauce. Don't let him." A coughing fit interrupted whatever he was trying to say. By the time the nurses rushed in, he'd slipped into unconsciousness. He never finished that conversation. Dad passed away 2 weeks later. The funeral was a blur of tears and traditions. Hundreds of customers coming to pay their respects to the man who fed their families for decades. Uncle Peter handled all the arrangements, insisting I shouldn't worry about anything but grieving. I threw myself into work at the restaurant, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of the kitchen. The staff, many of whom had worked there since I was a child, welcomed me back with open arms. Even in our grief, we kept the Golden Dragon's standards high. Dad would have wanted that. Then came the meeting with Dad's lawyer. I arrived at Mr. Zhang's office expecting a simple reading of the will. Instead, I found Uncle Peter already there, sitting behind the lawyer's desk like he owned it. "Ah, Lucy," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Good, we can begin." Mr. Zhang looked uncomfortable as he pulled out a document. "This is unusual," he started, "but I've received an updated will from your father, dated just 3 weeks before his death." My heart started pounding. 3 weeks before he died? Dad could barely hold a pen by then. "The will stipulates," Mr. Zhang continued, That ownership of the Golden Dragon restaurant, including all assets and recipes, is to be transferred to Peter Chen. The room started spinning. That's impossible, I heard myself say. Dad wanted me to have the restaurant. He told me. Now, Lucy, Uncle Peter cut in smoothly, your father and I discussed this extensively. He was worried about you. So young, so inexperienced in business. He wanted to make sure his legacy was protected. By giving it to you? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. I've been running the business side for 20 years, he replied. I know every supplier, every number, every detail. You're a good cook, Lucy, but the Golden Dragon needs more than that to survive. I looked at Mr. Zhang. This can't be legal. Dad wasn't in any condition to change his will. The lawyer shuffled papers nervously. The will appears properly executed with witnesses, unless you have evidence of undue influence. She doesn't, Uncle Peter said firmly. Lucy, don't make this difficult. You can keep your job as head chef. Nothing has to change. Except everything would change. I could see it in his eyes. The plans he had, the changes he wanted to make. The Golden Dragon wouldn't be a family restaurant anymore. It would become another soulless chain, trading on our reputation while serving cheaper, easier versions of our traditional dishes. The recipes, I said suddenly. The secret recipes aren't mentioned in the will. Uncle Peter's smile faltered slightly. They're part of the restaurant's assets. No, I stood up, gripping Grandma's cookbook in my bag. They're family heirlooms passed down separately from the business. Dad gave them to me before he died. He wasn't in his right mind by then. Uncle Peter snapped, his composure cracking. He didn't know what he was doing. Those recipes belong to the restaurant, to me. I turned to Mr. Zhang. I'll be contesting the will, I said quietly. Please expect to hear from my lawyer. As I walked out, Uncle Peter called after me. You're making a mistake, Lucy. Your father never trusted you with the real recipes anyway. What you have is worthless. I kept walking, but his words hit home. Was he right? Had Dad given me an outdated version? Was there another cookbook somewhere with the real recipes? But then I remembered Dad's voice, weak but urgent, trying to warn me about Uncle Peter asking about the recipes. Why would he have been worried if he'd already planned to give everything to his brother? That night, I sat in my apartment above the restaurant, not for much longer, if Uncle Peter had his way, and opened Grandma's cookbook. The pages were yellowed with age, stained with sauce and spice marks. Grandma's elegant Chinese characters filled the margins with notes and variations. Dad's additions were there too, his neat handwriting documenting decades of refinements. And there, tucked between the pages, I found something that made my heart stop. A letter, written in my father's shaky hand, dated just days before he died. My dearest Lucy, it began, if you're reading this, then Peter has done exactly what I feared he would. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, my father's final words spreading across the aged paper. My dearest Lucy, if you're reading this, then Peter has done exactly what I feared he would. He's been pressuring me to change my will, visiting almost daily with lawyers and documents. When I refuse, he threatens to expose irregularities in the restaurant's books, irregularities I now suspect he created himself. I want you to know that any will giving the Golden Dragon to Peter is false. I would never betray our family's legacy like that. But more importantly, I would never betray you. What Peter doesn't know, what no one knows except you now, is that Grandma's cookbook isn't just recipes. Look carefully at the back pages, the ones that seem blank. Your grandmother was cleverer than anyone knew. I love you, Lucy. Trust yourself. Trust your heritage. And remember what I always told you about the heart of a family restaurant. Love, Dad. I quickly flipped to the back of the cookbook, where several pages appeared empty. Holding them up to the light, I noticed faint impressions in the paper. Lemon juice, one of the oldest tricks in the book. I smiled, remembering how Grandma used to tell me stories about secret messages during wartime. A quick pass with a warm iron revealed lines of text appearing like magic on the seemingly blank pages. What I found made my heart race. Bank statements, transaction records, detailed notes about business dealings dating back years. All in Uncle Peter's handwriting. He'd been embezzling from the restaurant for over a decade, small amounts at first, growing larger as his gambling debts mounted. False vendors, inflated invoices, creative accounting that my father, trusting his brother completely, had never questioned. The evidence was damning, and Grandma had caught it all. The next entry in her neat handwriting explained everything. Peter thinks I'm just an old woman who doesn't understand business. He doesn't know I worked as an accountant before coming to America. I keep these records in case they're ever needed. Michael trusts too much. Lucy must know the truth. A wave of emotions hit me: grief for my father's betrayal by his own brother, pride in my grandmother's foresight, and a burning determination to make things right. The next morning, I arrived at the Golden Dragon early, before the prep cooks. Uncle Peter was already there, going through papers in the office. He looked up in surprise when I walked in. "Lucy, your shift doesn't start for hours." "We need to talk," I said, placing Grandma's cookbook on his desk. "About recipes and creative accounting." His face remained neutral, but I saw his eyes flick to the cookbook. "I told you, whatever recipes you have are worthless." "Oh, these recipes are priceless," I replied, opening the book to the revealed pages. Especially Grandma's recipe for catching embezzlers. The color drained from his face as he recognized his own handwriting. "Where did you? That's impossible." "Grandma was an accountant, did you know that? She saw what you were doing years ago. Kept records of everything. Dad didn't know, he trusted you too much. But Grandma knew someone would need this evidence someday." "Evidence of what?" He tried to bluff, but his voice shook. "Those are just notes, they don't prove anything." "Really? Should we ask the IRS what they think? Or maybe the police?" I watched his face carefully. "How much do you owe now, Uncle Peter? The gambling debts must be pretty huge if you're willing to forge Dad's will." He seemed to collapse in on himself, suddenly looking old and tired. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed time, needed control of the restaurant." "To what? Run it into the ground? Turn it into a cheap takeout chain?" I shook my head. "This restaurant isn't just a business, it's our family's heart." "What do you want?" he asked, defeated. "First, you're going to call Mr. Zhang and confess that the will is forged. Then you're going to sign a statement admitting to the embezzlement. After that, we'll talk about repayment." "You'll ruin me," he protested. "No, Uncle Peter, you ruined yourself. But I'm giving you a chance to make it right, for Dad's sake." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and paperwork. True to his word, Uncle Peter confessed to forging the will. Mr. Zhang was horrified and immediately started the process to invalidate it. The original will was found in Dad's safety deposit box, leaving everything to me just as he planned. I chose not to press criminal charges about the embezzlement. Instead, we worked out a repayment plan. Uncle Peter would sell his house and cash in his investments to repay most of what he'd taken. The rest would come from his new job as a junior accountant at a small firm, under strict supervision. The staff took the news of Uncle Peter's departure better than I expected. Many of them had suspected something wasn't right with the books, but hadn't known who to tell. "Your father was too kind to see it," Mrs. Liu, our longest-serving waitress, told me. "But we all knew you were the one who should run the Golden Dragon." Slowly, I began putting my own mark on the restaurant while honoring its traditions. The core menu stayed the same. Our regulars would revolt if I changed the classics. But I added a seasonal chef's menu showcasing new interpretations of traditional dishes. The critics loved it, praising the blend of innovation and respect for heritage. I hired a proper accountant, one recommended by the Small Business Association, and installed modern computer systems to track everything. No more manual books that could be easily altered. The most surprising change came 3 months after Uncle Peter left. I was experimenting with a new dumpling recipe when a familiar face appeared in the kitchen. Aunt Helen. I hadn't seen Uncle Peter's wife since everything happened. She'd moved in with their daughter during the scandal. "Lucy," she smiled hesitantly, holding out a worn manila envelope. "I found these while packing up the house. I think they belong here." Inside were photographs spanning decades. The Golden Dragon's opening day, with Grandma and Grandpa beaming in front of the new sign. Dad as a teenager, learning to cook from his mother. Me as a toddler, sitting on the counter while Dad showed me how to shape dough. Peter wasn't always. Aunt Helen paused, tears in her eyes. The gambling changed him. But these memories, they're still real, still precious. I hugged her, both of us crying now. "Stay for dinner," I said. "I'm trying out a new recipe. I could use an honest opinion." She did stay and has become a regular at the restaurant again. She even helps out on busy nights, greeting customers with the warmth she was always known for. Uncle Peter and I aren't close anymore. Too much has happened for that. But last month, he came to the restaurant for the first time since leaving. He sat quietly at a corner table, ordered the house special soup, and left a note with his payment. "You've made your father proud," it said simply. I keep that note tucked in Grandma's cookbook, along with Dad's letter and all the precious recipes that have sustained our family through generations. The cookbook stays in the restaurant's new safe, but now everyone knows that I'm its rightful guardian. Last week, a young food blogger interviewed me for a story about multi-generational restaurants. "What's the secret?" she asked. "How do you maintain quality and tradition while staying relevant?" I thought about Grandma's secret accounting records, about Dad's final letter, about all the love and history baked into every dish we serve. "The heart of every family restaurant is its kitchen," I told her, echoing Dad's words. "And the soul is in its recipes. But the real secret ingredient? It's the stories behind those recipes, the triumphs and failures, the loves and losses, the lessons learned and passed down. Every dish we serve carries a piece of that history." She wrote that down eagerly, but I don't think she fully understood. How could she know about the nights I spend in a quiet kitchen, practicing Grandma's techniques until my hands move with the same sureness hers did? Or the mornings when I catch a whiff of ginger and garlic that takes me right back to watching Dad cook? The Golden Dragon is more than just a restaurant now. It's a testament to family strength, to the power of truth, and to the legacy of 3 generations of love poured into every dish we serve. And that's a recipe that can never be stolen or forged. Tonight, as I lock up after another busy service, I pause in the dining room. The chairs are stacked, the floors swept clean, but the air still holds the lingering scent of spices and stories. Through the window, the old dragon sign glows golden in the darkness, a beacon of tradition and truth. Dad was right about recipes being more than ingredients. Their history, their family, their love. And sometimes their justice too.